right, good evening, everybody. But that's okay, right? Welcome to the One Club. Yes, we did used to be on 26th Street, but now we're here. We moved a couple years ago. I'm Mary Warlick. I'm the CEO of the One Club, and yes, it can be done. And and everybody has always thought, or in years past, of the One Club as being an old boys club, but we are rapidly turning it, or going to turn it into an old girls club. And to start that, well, not that old. I mean, you know, but anyway, to start that, I'm going to introduce Phil Growick, who is then going to introduce our fabulous panelists, and we'll start this evening on. And this, as everyone knows, this is the first part of a three-part series of Creative Women's Leadership Series. So it's a membership drive. It's free to members. We got two more really fabulous programs, one on mentoring and fireside chat with Shelley Lazarus coming up. So special events. So stay posted. So Phil, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for coming this evening, and again to the One Club for hosting this event and having us kick off this special leadership, women leadership in advertising. And I want to thank especially Mary, who is the CEO of the One Club, and Kevin Swanpole, who is the president, and most especially to Lucy Lopez-Travers over there, who has really worked hard to put this all together. So thank them. Now, as you know from my first time W, I should introduce myself first before I introduce this incredible panel so you know how this all came about. I'm managing director of HSK Search here in New York, and I've had the privilege and the honor and the fun of working with not only these women, but some of the top women in advertising creatives all over the world. And I looked at junior people as I would meet them, which was fairly infrequently, but they kept talking about the goddesses of the advertising world or the gods of the advertising world, not knowing that all of the people here started where the juniors were. Everybody has to realize that everybody begins someplace. So when we came up with the idea for my first time, it was top global creative women talk about their first commercial ad or site, but most importantly, what they learned from it. So the women here, who are five of the most incredible women in the advertising world, wrote these great stories that they're going to talk about. Now again, before we introduce them, each one of them will tell their story. And then at the end, when we're all finished, we're going to throw this open for any question that you may have for them. You'll raise your hand, I'll acknowledge you, and then you go ahead and just ask away, because that's what you're here for, to get the counsel, advice, and fun of these stories from these women. Now we're going to begin with Vida Cornelious. Vida is the Chief Creative Officer in North America for Global U in Detroit and New York. There's Sarah Barkley. Sarah is Executive Creative Director at JWT in New York. Khloe Gottlieb is Executive Creative Director at RGA here in New York. Susan Westre is a Global Creative Director for Ogilvy and Mather, divides her time between Paris and New York, not bad. And Liz Paradise, who is Group Creative Director at Kinney, North Carolina. So we're going to begin with Vida, and Vida, take it away.
Let me make sure that, okay, it's on. Good evening. So I first want to say it's always been a pleasure to sit on these panels and be a part of Phil's excursion of what we as women have experienced in this business, good, bad, and ugly. So when he asked me to participate and he asked about my first time, I said, Phil, that's so personal. Do you really want to know? So truthfully speaking, when I sat down to write it, I had to really think about, what was that first time that I felt was kind of defining, as a young creative person. And you get into the business and you have all these aspirations for what it's going to be. I mean, my parents bought me a suit. I had the famous black portfolio. I was well-versed in the Maxine Petro, how to get a job in advertising, rhetoric, and I believed it, of course. I had 5 campaigns. I was very proud of that. And I walked into my first job. I had gotten hired at Burrell Communications Group in Chicago, which was a multicultural firm coming out of graduate school and feeling very well-versed in what I needed to do after some internships. However, I did not know that the creative director I was going to be working for had no idea I was coming. And he was not a nice little man. He actually looked like one of the Bee Gees. He was very hairy. I was very afraid of him most of the time. And he ended almost every phrase with motherfucker, motherfucker. So I said, oh, wow, okay. This is going to be interesting. You know, I had my book there. I was so proud. You know, he was flipping the pages, total silence. You know, I had worked so hard, college, graduate school, put the book together, read the Maxine Petro book several times, and here it was, I was met with utter silence. I spent probably 4 months being tortured by him, learning how to draw type, redraw type, set type, pick colors, pick PMS colors, memorize PMS colors. It was a nightmare. But ultimately, he turned out to be a great mentor and friend in the long run. He gave me many opportunities, and one of which was to do a print ad. So I spent a lot of time working on this print ad. I was in my cubicle. You know, I was staring at this brief. I had no idea what to do with it. I was kind of trying to conjure up not Maxine Petro, but what's her name from Who's the Boss? Angela Bauer, right? I was like, oh my God, what would Angela do? You know, so I'm trying to come up with this print ad. And eventually I did, and he liked it, and he finally comes in my office, and he's like, you know what, you're a pretty good motherfucking art director. I'm like, oh my God, you know? So then I move on to actually getting a shot at a TV assignment. And I was very proud of that. And it turned out that the assignment happened to be for turning the General Market Sprite campaign about obeying your thirst into a multicultural expression for young people. What the hell? I had no idea, right? What did that mean? So I'm sitting in my office once again trying to, you know, use a Ouija board or whatever to come up with an idea because I was panicked and I knew I had a deadline. And he comes by my cubicle and he's very hairy and he's very mean and he leans over my shoulder and he's like, you're not gonna find any answers and ideas in that motherfucking page. You gotta look inside yourself, kid. And I'm like, what? I mean, it was like very Rocky Balboa-ish. I had no idea what I was supposed to do with that piece of wisdom, like inside myself. What does that mean, you know? So as I'm like thinking about this assignment, thinking about what it means to be a young urban kid with aspirations to be innovative and obey their own instincts, I said, wait a minute, okay, I kind of do that every day. You know, me and my friends, we like to listen to hip hop music, so on and so forth. So I actually drew on that as a way to try and land in a campaign, and it turned out to be a very successful campaign for them called Freestyle, and it was actually their first kind of iteration into using hip hop artists and merging that with you know, general market, you know, marketing and so on and so forth, and it became a good platform for Sprite, needless to say. So from there, I went on to do many other TV commercials and so on and so forth, but the Obi-Wan Kenobi advice of my creative director definitely stuck over the years, and that was to always kind of think about, you know, who I am and what I represent and what I am about, and as a way of kind of feeding my creativity. So over the years, I've since had my own teams that I've mentored and clients that I've argued with and other campaigns I've sold and other ads I've written and so on and so forth. But I always felt like that was an example of someone who took the time to kind of polish me, so to speak. He immediately let me know I was a turd when I arrived. But by the time I left there, you know, 3 years later, he had definitely let me know that there was a possibility that I could shine. So I decided that that would be my mantra going forward. So whenever I work with young people, I try and do that very thing for them, is try and help them understand that who they are, diverse individual or not, interests or not, likes, dislikes, whatever it may be, it can be a foundation for where your creativity can come from. So that's my first time.
And now Sarah Barkley, again, Executive Creative Director at JWT New York.
Hi. I cheated a little bit when I wrote my story because it was actually 10 first. So tonight I'm just going to talk about one of them and extend it a little bit because they are only short paragraphs. So I'm going to talk about my first time that I actually got to go on stage at Cannes and pick up the coveted gold lion. And not only was it incredibly memorable, and picking up one of those things back then was pretty wild. They don't have quite as many, they didn't have quite as many categories as they do now. So it really was this precious thing. And as I walked on stage, the other memorable thing about it was that my husband was sitting in the audience naked from the waist up, and I was carrying his shirt. So I'm going to just tell you how that happened and start a couple of years before that. We were pitching in an agency called Clemenger BBDO in Melbourne for the milk account. It was the Confederation of Milk Authorities, and it was a bunch of kind of farmers who didn't really know anything about advertising. And my partner and I at the time were just kind of thinking, okay, what's a way in to crack this? And we kind of liked the notion that a lot of kids get attributed to the milkman if they don't look like their dad. And we thought that was an interesting kind of way in, and developed a campaign called Milk Legendary Stuff. So we did a couple of ads, and I mean, this was probably late 90s. And we were, back then too, in Australia, which is where I'm from, can wasn't really a thing that you entered. It was kind of like just this thing that was overseas somewhere, and you know, only really famous Americans and Brits used to win there. But our agency entered the work, and we heard 24 hours before that we'd won an award. But of course, as Australia is 24 hours from the rest of the bloody world, there was no way we could get there. So the agency did this really nice thing and said, okay, we'll send you next year, and you know, you can just go to the festival and enjoy everything that Cannes has to offer. So we continued working. It was great winning the award, but not being there. We continued working and did the next in the campaign the next year, and entered that. And we got to go to Cannes, and the partner I worked with actually didn't go to Cannes. He wanted to go back to Yorkshire and travel around because he didn't think he could stand being around advertising types. So, but my husband and I thought, no, we'll go to Cannes and then we'll hang out in Europe. So we were there, and we were staying in this little flea pit hotel called the Atlantis, I think. It was like a 2-star. It was just awful. And again, the day before they were due to give out the awards for television, we got a phone call, and lo and behold, we'd won a gold. And there we were there at Cannes. So I was tickled pink, and I got to take Shane. So I sort of pulled something out of my case and decided that's what I'd wear, because of course I didn't sort of think that I would win 2 years in a row, and got dressed up, and we went there, and we got ushered in via the red carpet, and it's such an amazing thing. Like, I was younger then, so such an amazing thing to sit in this auditorium, and Marcello Surfer was sitting to the left. Actually, my husband said that he couldn't sit next to him because he was holding the seat for me, so that was Shane's little brush with fame. And so we got there, and the lights are dimming, and Shane's sort of getting excited, and I'm excited. And I think our category was pretty much one of the first ones. And the ad came up, and we're sitting there smiling, and the lights go on. And what they did in those days was they shine the lights on the people in the seats. And so we're sitting there, and it was my turn. I got up, and we embraced. And then I got to try and get out of the aisle, and my dress, which was this Australian designer called Colette Dinnigan, was this kind of meshy thing that I'm known for layering. So it was this layering piece that was over this other piece, and I'm trying to disentangle myself from my husband, and it just wouldn't happen. And so by now the crowd are kind of giggling, and we're up on the screen so everyone can see what's going on. And people started to clap, and then they started to chant. And the chant was, "Get it off, get it off." I think they were talking about my dress, but what Shane did was take off his shirt, sat back down without his shirt on, and I walked up on stage, like my first time on stage, to pick up a gold award, carrying a shirt under my arm. So it was quite a famous incident, especially for the Australians, and the TV cameras sort of caught it. And afterwards, as we were walking down out of the convention centre, people were coming up to us and asking if we'd actually done that on purpose. They were asking Shane if he'd organised the whole thing. They were giving him 6 packs of beers. He actually got more job offers than me. And it was on Australian television. It was just fantastic. But it was just such an amazing experience. I mean, if you get the chance to actually win something and actually be at Cannes and actually pick it up, I mean, it's just the most amazing time that you'll have in your careers if you do. And they don't come around that often, so embrace it if it ever happens. So yeah, that was my first time on stage picking up a gold lion with and naked, well, from the waist up, husband in the auditorium, and a shirt under my arm.
Thank you, Chloe.
I wish I had seen that.
The point being, again, somebody's got to win the gold lion. Why shouldn't it be any of you? Because you can. And that's the whole point of that, right? Okay, now Khloe Gottlieb, who is Executive Creative Director at RGA New York.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me tonight. I think it's really interesting. My first time in advertising wasn't even in advertising because I started at RGA in 2000, and we were a small web design agency at the time and didn't even become an agency probably until 7 years later. So it's actually a first time tonight even being asked to represent women in advertising. So it's really interesting, and I think as creative people, it's always the first time. Every time you get a new brief or have to go on stage or have to come up with an idea, pitch an idea, do a new business pitch, you have to dig down deep into yourself. So tonight is one of those first times, so thanks, yeah. But I want to talk about 3 defining first times in my career. One, my first job, which is still my job. My second is returning to work after having my first baby. Now I have 2 kids. And my third is the first time leading an agency as a creative leader. So those are the 3 things I wanted to share. I was working at Parsons School of Design just to pay for my graduate program in the late 90s, and was really inspired by the design going on around me. And Bob Greenberg came and spoke at Parsons, and sometimes you just meet people that have such a vision, and you immediately know that no matter what, you'll do anything to work for them. And so everyone around me told me it was crazy and I wasn't qualified, but I spent the next, I think, 3 or 4 months working every contact I knew to get an interview at RGA and talk my way into a job as an interaction designer, which was designing information systems, understanding information architecture and behavior, and just looking at digital systems. And I started, and my first day on the job, there was no orientation. I was told to get wireframes ready for a client meeting, presenting to Discovery Health. There was a 1,000-page health portal, and I had no idea what I was doing, and I just looked around and found people near me that knew what they were doing and just started to learn on the job. And I think that was really amazing about being in a place with great people, is you learn a craft over time, over thousands of hours. So you have to have those great mentors. But I really focused on the work, and that's what I kept doing. I focused on the work. I didn't worry about my title, whether I was a man or a woman, who I was working with. I just really wanted to do great work, and so that was a great momentum. And I don't think my gender really became apparent even to me in my career until I got pregnant, which leads to the second first time. I was about 8 months pregnant when my boss, the head of experience design, Kip Wojtek, told me he was leaving. So he said, "I'm leaving, and if you want, you can put your hat in the ring for this position." And I thought, no way in hell will I ever get this position. There was no women around me, above me, next to me that were pregnant at work. I didn't even know what that looked like. I felt like a freak. And I didn't even know if I would return to work after having a baby, because I didn't know how I could love a baby and work as hard as I was working. I mean, I used to, in those years, work all night sometimes. Like, I remember sleeping on a yoga mat under my desk some nights. So, but RGA is not like that anymore. We've grown up, I swear. That perception is actually, it's really not like that anymore. For anyone that's interested in a job, no. Yeah, so I said, what the hell? And I put my hat in the ring, and I marched into Bob Greenberg's office, 8 months pregnant. I felt like a whale, and I had spent all night putting together a vision for the future of not interaction design, but experience design. It needed a new name. We needed to think bigger. We needed to think global. We needed to think about, designing with prototypes. And I had a whole kind of 10-point charter and a plan for who would cover me on maternity leave. And I went up against 5 men, 2 of whom were my mentors, and 1 of whom was on the executive team. And it turned out I was the only one who had put together a presentation. of a vision, because the guys just assumed that they would get the position, so they just went in to have a chat. And there I was, pregnant, but really, really prepared for this conversation. And I heard later that Bob actually talked to the head of HR and asked if something like, could a pregnant woman or a mom even like do a job like that? It hadn't happened yet at RGA. But I got the job. And then I had to make a huge decision, which was not even knowing what it would be like to be a mom. Would I return to work in a certain amount of time and take on this huge responsibility? And I think at that moment, I could have stepped aside, I could have stepped out, but there was something in me that just drove me forward and said, as you know, Sheryl Sandberg says, lean in, and that was very much in my spirit. I felt like I needed to take that risk and that leap into the unknown, and I do think first times in being creative, it's a lot of leaps like that. It's just leaps of faith. And so I went for it. And when I went back to work, I remember those first few months sitting in my office between meetings, pumping and crying, because there was no pump room. There was no other moms. I was the only one, and I missed my baby so much, and I felt so torn up. But I look back now, and I'm so happy that I went back. I'm so happy that I went back. And lo and behold, 5 years later, I was pregnant again, and by this time, Nike Plus had turned into Nike Fuel. RGA had global offices. We were no longer 100 people. We were 1,200 people. And we were global. And my boss didn't quit, but Nick Law got elevated into a global position. And so he said, I was pregnant again. And he said, Chloe, I want you and Taris Wayner, who you know, Taris Wayner, I really like this idea of stories and systems. I want a storyteller and a systematic designer to run the New York office. And I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I went back the next week, and I said, Nick, thank you so much. I'm so honored that you thought of me for this opportunity. It's really great. I said, but I'm sorry, I'm actually pregnant, and I'll be out for 5 months. I'm not coming back sooner, so you're gonna have to look for someone else, and we'll find something, you know, for me to do when I get back. I'll keep doing experience design or whatever you want. And he turned to me, he goes, okay. If you guys know Nick Law, he's like, all right, we'll wait for you. He said, oh, we'll wait for you. And then I didn't know what to say, and I went home and I cried, and I called my best friend, who's always gives me good advice, and she went through the layers of my no with me. And it turned out my no was not about the baby. I knew what it was to be a working mom and how crazy that was. The no was about my fear, because I didn't know if I could do it. Like, I didn't know if I had it in me to be that leader, to like really step up and be responsible for RGA's creative in New York. And I was terrified. And I peeled off all the layers of my fear, and when I got down to the nugget deep inside, the digging down deep in you, I wanted it more than anything that I ever wanted. And so I closed my eyes and I ran ahead and took a leap into the biggest unknown I've ever faced. And I'm doing it. We're leading creative in New York. Yeah. Yeah.
If you get pregnant again, the G in RGA will be for Gottlieb pretty soon.
If I get pregnant again, maybe Bob will.
Right.
Maybe Bob will say, you know, I'm thinking of retiring. I know you're pregnant. But you might want to think about running RGA. All right.
Susan Westre, again, is Global Creative Director at Ogilvy and Mather. Susan.
Thank you. I actually have to correct that. I'm an executive creative director. I'm global on IBM, not global of Ogilvy. So thank you. So I'm going to talk about 3 firsts for me today, and it's going to be my first job, and then the first big break that I felt I got, and then the second big break. My first job was very unglamorous. Now, since everybody here is already obviously working in New York, people have kind of made it to New York, but I started out in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, And I had gone to the university to be a painter and didn't think I could make it in the art world, and I had no idea what to do. And I had a friend who was a copywriter at the Boston company and said, there's something called advertising. You should maybe try that. And so I actually, at my first job, was at a little place called Franklin Fisher and Associates that was looking for a paste-up artist and receptionist. And I went in to interview, and it turns out Franklin Fisher and Associates was one person. It was Franklin Fisher, and I was his associate. So that was that was the beginning of my very unglamorous ad career. I moved to Los Angeles in the 80s, and it was there that I was shunned by everybody because I was this little art director from Wisconsin who didn't have a fancy pedigree. And I was lucky enough to get a job at a interesting agency. It was half Mormon, half Jewish. And at that agency, I met a copywriter who was very talented, didn't seem to know it. He was more interested in basketball and writing puns. And this man's name was Chris Wall, and we eventually became partners. And he is quite a brilliant writer. Our first big break came when a traffic manager at the place we were working at got a job at BBDO. And she told Steve Hayden, who was running BBDO, hey, there's this really great team that you should meet, and come over and meet them. Well, we had a shitty book because we weren't really working at a good agency, but we had a lot of ideas that we thought were pretty good. So we put the ideas in the book along with the ads that we had produced, and we went into Steve, and he was nice to us, but we could tell it's like, ooh, our work isn't quite up to snuff. But what we did after meeting him was we put together a digital Rolodex that we called Headhunter that was done in HyperCard. That was a way of searching for people, and of course we put ourselves in all over this digital Rolodex with all these amazing qualities and why we should be hired. And he actually hired us as these junior people to work on Apple. And that was a wonderful break, I think, because it was just right timing, and working on Apple was tough in LA because we actually had to compete with everybody here in New York at BBDO. And at the time, TV was king, and so all the heavy hitters of TV were at BBDO in New York. And interestingly enough, one of the big lessons I learned at that time was know and love your product, because we were writing commercials for Apple, for Macintosh. We loved Macintosh. We used Macintosh. The people here in New York at the time had the gods of advertising who were doing Pepsi and HBO and all this wonderful stuff, had never used a computer. It was all men, not because they were men, but they had secretaries that would type up their scripts, and none of them had touched a Macintosh. So it allowed us to actually do commercials that made sense because we loved the product, and competing against, we were these junior guys, but competing against all these big timers. We sold, it was the first time I'd ever done a campaign, and we sold 5 spots, and got to work with a director named Joe Pitka, who was one of the gods of directing at the time. And of course we walk in and he looks at us and he says, "Who the fuck are you?" And of course we weren't used to being treated that way. We were used to being treated with a bit of respect, and that was a great learning experience, actually. I found that working with tough personalities kind of helps you be able to deal with anything eventually. My second big break was actually at it surprised me because my partner Chris went off to work at Wyden. It was devastating for me because we had worked together for years. And at the time, Ogilvy came knocking at my door, and I wasn't that interested in moving. And I met at the CEO at the time of Ogilvy was a woman named Charlotte Beers, and they wanted me to meet her. So I went and met Charlotte, and she had this wonderful Southern drawl, and she said, "Darling, I hear I'm supposed to convince you to work at Ogilvy," and I said, "Wow, well, thank you." And she said, "Let me just ask you, how many women are on the board at BBDO?" And of course, there were no women on the board at BBDO. And not that that was my goal in life, but it was interesting when I realized that here was a company that had a woman as a CEO, and BBDO was kind of known as an old boys club. And also, interestingly, related to Chloe's story, I was pregnant at this time when they were interviewing me, and I had waited a long time to have children, and I didn't, I had qualms about this, but I said, I didn't tell anybody I was pregnant when I took the job, because I knew that I was going to kind of work through the pregnancy, and I didn't really think it should even be, frankly, an issue that I was pregnant. So I took the job, and I famously worked up until I was going to the hospital in labor, just because I like that. And then I was at a shoot in Paris 4 days after giving birth with a big hemorrhoid pillow in the metro, and it actually all worked out. For me, the big break, which I thought when I joined Ogilvy, it allowed me. I actually worked on 2 continents. I was hired in Paris to work in Paris and New York, and it opened up this kind of world of a different way of seeing things. So I consider that to be another big break. I wanted to also mention, interestingly, because this was going to happen tonight, I finally picked up about a week ago Sheryl Sandberg's book that Chloe referenced. And I just wanted to mention this to everybody, because if you haven't read that book, man or woman in this audience, you have to read it. It is, business books are usually kind of boring. This is one of the better books. You really, there's a lot of lessons for everybody in that book. So, thanks.
And Liz Paradise, again, GCD at McKinney in Chapel Hill. Liz.
Thanks, Phil. So I'm going to bring it home with a short and sweet story that was from the beginning of my career and scarred me for life. Let me start by asking, how many of you in the room are in your first job? Okay, second job? Third or more? All right, cool. Manhattan obviously is a community with options. I've always been in the South. I went to school at UNC and fell in love with the South and didn't want to leave. So I ended up at the Martin Agency early in my career, and then McKinney. So I've only been to 2 places, and then with a family and all of that, got roots and stayed. And I have to say, I feel incredibly blessed as a woman to have been at 2 places that never made me feel like a woman in advertising. I've always just felt like a creative, except for once. So I was in my first year, and I was at Martin, and I can imagine the conversation that went on in a room. If any of you know who Mike Hughes is, one of the sweetest men in the world, and just a formative creative director for me, I'm sure they were saying, you know, she's worked hard, and she seems pretty smart. Let's throw her a bone. Let's give her something where she feels like she's, you know, growing in her career and she's important and she can have some accountability. I'm sure that's what it was. And it was a small thing, but it meant the world to me when they came and they said, you know what, you're going to be in charge of the naming of the new roller coaster at our amusement park client, which was King's Dominion. You're in charge. And I was like, oh my God, I think I called my mother right away. I'm in charge. I get to name a roller coaster. And in fact, it wasn't really me naming it. I got smart. I put out an email to the agency. I said, anybody got a good name for a roller coaster, submit it to me. And I described it, and it was really cool. It hadn't even been built yet, but it was gonna have like these loop-de-loops, and it was one of those things where you're harnessed from the top, so you sway side to side. And it was gonna take you down right over water, so you felt like on the way down you were gonna plunge in. So this was the description I gave everybody. I'm like, you go around and you get swung side to side and you almost hit the water. So give me some inspiring names. So I collect them over a couple of days, and then I go to the hard work of culling it down, where I felt like I was doing the really, really important job. And so I very powerfully edited and put in a list of maybe 20 names. And I sent them up to the account people, and I said, ready to go to the client. Now, just a little note in the back of your mind, the client was a Christian fundamentalist. Just remember that for a moment. So, I send it off, and I'm feeling really good about it. And there were a bunch of names on there. I think we'd put some recommends or something. And I was just sitting there like fat and happy, kind of waiting for what's the decision going to be, which one of the names that I culled down is going to be the winner. And about 45 minutes passes from the time I sent it to the account people, and I know they shipped it off to the client. And my phone rings in my office, and it's the head account guy at the agency, and he goes, "Paradise, get up here!" And I'm like, okay, get up here now! And I'm thinking, oh my God, well, what have I done? I think I'm gonna get fired, but I don't know what I did. And so I walk upstairs, and he's holding the piece of paper that they had faxed already. He's holding the piece of paper, and as I'm walking down the hall, he goes, "You think this is funny? You think this is funny? This is not funny." And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And he has this one name, he's got a big circle around it, and he has this one name circled, and he goes, "This is not funny." And I look at it, and I go, I don't understand the problem. And he goes, "What?" And I go, "What's wrong with that name?" And he goes, "Oh my God. You don't know, do you?" "No what?" It was Circle Jerk. And so then, to make matters worse, he had to explain it to me. So the most miraculous thing happened is that our Christian fundamentalist client didn't know either. Because there was never a comment. It was not chosen. But anyway, so that was the only time I've ever felt like my woman is showing. My very naive woman is showing. And probably the bigger lesson that day was accountability, that anything that you put out, you better know what you're putting out. But that's it. That's all I have to say.
All right, now we're going to just throw it open to questions. Some of you may have particular questions for any of the panel members, so raise your hand, please, and we'll begin. Oh, come on. Yes.
My name is Sean. I was for Vida. You said that the Sprite, was that freestyle? Was that like rapping around Pool Bar and Marshall Fest? I remember those. That was good.
Okay, good.
I remember the ads, the print ads, and
That's true.
Other questions? Look, how often are you going to get 5 women like this in one place? Yes.
So a lot of your stories were stories of your past and as you were coming up into the industry. Has there been a recent time for any of you where you felt like a woman in a kind of a man's land?
Today.
Yeah, so it still happens often, correct?
Yeah, today I got asked to go to a new business meeting, hello. So I got asked to go to a new business meeting next Thursday, and I told the man who asked me, he said, "We were talking, we thought you'd be perfect to come help us pitch this new piece of business." And I was thinking, great. And then I looked at my calendar and I realized that I had a client workshop. I said, "I can't go, but maybe Tim can." And he looked at me and he said, "Oh, we just need a woman to come."
We just need a woman to come to that meeting because it's all men that are part of the team. That happened today.
I have to tell you something interesting about asking about women. As a recruiter, by federal law, we're not allowed to discriminate male, female, sexual gender, anything, religion, God knows what. Every once in a while, somebody will say, I need a woman. Well, what do you mean you need a woman? You don't have a wife or girlfriend? No, I need a woman for the account. We need a woman for the... I said, well, we can't do that. Agencies right now, it seems across the board, across the country, are really seeing a pinch on creative talent from the women's side. They're asking for women, not necessarily because the clients are demanding it or asking for it, but they themselves feel that they need it. They need another perspective. They need another angle on things. So the women that are coming up right now that are beginning or a little further than beginning, you're in a great place at a great time. And just don't let anything get you down. Even something like this again, where even now, well, we just need a woman, which is ridiculous. But anyway, I think that Sarah wanted to say something.
I was just going to say that most purchasing decisions, I think there's some, huge number, like 80% are made by women. So I think that is a great reason to be a woman in marketing or advertising, and really show those boys what we've got. We've got balls.
I think you had a question?
This is for anyone on the panel. How do you deal with pressures of being outnumbered by many men without feeling less confident in your craft, especially when there is like a brotherhood filled with high egos?
Oh my God, that's daily. Well, I will honestly say one of my huge clients is an automotive client. That's about as boys club as it gets sometimes. I would say I find that I manage mainly men. Believe it or not, my creative team has a lot of men on it. So I deal with their egos daily. I stroke them a lot because they need that. The few girls that I have had come through, the few women, I feel very proud that are self-sufficient, smart, confident. And I see that right away a lot of times in the females, especially when I'm interviewing them. They seem to be a much, much more focused about what they want out of their career and what they want out of an experience. And I definitely respect that. When it comes to working with clients, even being in a situation where you're just yourself as a creative, having to validate your own talent or so on and so forth, it does become very challenging because I think most women don't naturally want to ego boast. I don't think that's what we're inclined to do. But early on in my career, I did learn that being prepared, being ready is probably the biggest weapon you can have, the most powerful tool you can have. And I got thrown into many situations before where people thought that, okay, we'll just see, is it a sink or a swim? And it was always a swim for me, no choice. Because I knew right away that you get one chance to get it done right. And after that, then the boys know. Watch that bitch, right? That's what it becomes a little bit. And I never had a problem with that because I knew that I was going to be a contender no matter what. So I feel like every now and then you still have to kind of show people that. But for the most part, I think that as you get more comfortable in your career, as you get more advanced in your skill set and your craft, then you really don't need to, I don't think, show that as much. But there becomes times for sure that I felt like I've had to be very clear.
Anybody else like to comment? Susan, Liz?
Yeah, I'll just add one thing, and that's I think as women, I think it's important to not try and become men in business. I mean, men can be assholes, but women can be assholes too. So it's like, just be human and carry it that way. We shouldn't be emulating a bad model. So
I'll just build on what you just said. I think it's okay to have egos. If you're talented, have an ego, that's fine. And I think the question is, what is the challenge? Are you specifically asking how do you handle it if somebody is trying to put you down, or is it just the presence of the ego that you're concerned about?
I mean, to that, when I was in college, I felt like there were so many young men who, like, you seemed like you knew everything, and it's like a bunch of guys, and say like I was the only one on their team, and because I'm not, so I don't really know a bunch of things. It's like I kind of felt like at times that I was just pushed to the side. So, but I knew that I had talent. I knew that I knew how to do the same things that they knew. But I just wasn't so far
they did. So it's like, how do I make myself have a voice within a team of men with egos or whatever, and let them know that, hey, I know this and I can do this, and I'm going to stand firm in this without whatever you say, because this is still a team. So how do I, make myself have a
Well, I think Vida hit it because I don't think women are naturally inclined to do that, and I think you have to learn your way of doing it. It's not about being somebody you're not, but if you know you're smart and you know you have something to contribute, you just need to make sure you get your voice in the room, even if you have to like elbow a little bit. Show them what you got, and that's something to be proud of. And I don't think it's necessarily. There are women like that too, right? So it's just you have to find your voice in the room and put yourself out there a little bit. And sometimes it's hard for people, but that's the beginning of how you're going to propel yourself up. The whole squeaky wheel thing, it's just true,
I'll just add one thing, because I do have, it's a great fact that you're saying that, because I had a young lady who worked for me, and just coming, I came from a general market environment into a multicultural agency, so I've only been with my current agency for about 4 years. So I hadn't really worked in an environment with so many different diverse backgrounds. And one of the young ladies that worked for me, she was an ACD level writer, but she really carried herself like she was still just a copywriter, even though her talent was definitely above and beyond that. And I really could not understand how many chances I was giving her, she would not just rise to the occasion. She happened to be Mexican. And there was a creative director that worked with her who would always take her ideas. He was always presenting for her. And I would say to her, I need you to present. I don't want him to present. I need you to present. And she would get so upset and so nervous. I could not understand it. I finally took her aside one day and asked her, I said, what is it? Why is it that I'm giving you these opportunities and you're not taking them? And it wasn't until she let me know that culturally it was very hard for her as a Mexican woman to kind of basically speak over a man. I was like, oh my God, well, I would have never known that, right? Because I felt like every time I was asking her to speak up on behalf of her own work, she felt like she was betraying this guy, even though she was much better than him, much smarter than him. So I had to basically remove him to make the situation a little easier for her. But it was the best move I could have made. But if I hadn't taken the time as a manager to really understand what's going on there, because I could see that this girl had talent, but I could not understand why her voice was not being heard. And was she stopping it or was I? But then when I realized it was a cultural barrier for her, then that just cracked it open for her. So needless to say, now I'm desperately trying to hold on to her because she's so good. She always wants to leave. But I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to help her with that, because otherwise she would have stayed up under someone's thumb indefinitely, partially because of a cultural barrier and also because she didn't know how to speak up for herself. So I think it's really important, that when you have a voice, you be confident in it and step out.
One thing I was just going to add to all these great suggestions is there are times, because I've worked with people who haven't been able to project themselves in the group, haven't been able to present or really get their voice across in the room. And sometimes just taking a presentation skills seminar, there are just wonderful little techniques that you can learn. And some people are natural born presences, but most people aren't. And you need to learn how to have your confidence. And so just look into some of these. And now there's so much good stuff online that you don't even need to pay a ton of money if you don't want, but sometimes people offer that in the agency, but those techniques actually help and work, I think.
Something else I'd like to say, again, getting back to being a recruiter and working with very senior people, most of the senior people that I work with, like the panel here, are incredibly nurturing. They want to be mentors. They want to help. They remember, again, where they started. Never be afraid to find somebody at your agency, a CD, a GCD, whoever, who you really feel is sensitive enough to what you may want, to your aspirations, to your goals, to what you want. Don't be afraid to knock on the door, go in, or in the open area, sit down with them and say, look, I need a chance. I want to be able to show you, to show the agency what I can do. Help me get that opportunity. And you will be surprised. They're going to feel gratified. They're going to feel, wow, I get a chance to really do something good for somebody. because that's eventually you will hopefully be where these women are now. You'll be looking back and saying, oh, gee, I remember that whole panel, and I want to help the kids coming up. So don't forget, don't be afraid to go to somebody that you think will help and just ask them. Simple as that. More questions, please. Yes, back there.
It's kind of a continuation of the last question, but has there been any time in your careers where people have called you bossy? And if so, is there like any tips or tricks on how to fight for the good work when you're dealing with people who see you through that lens?
Usually it's just bitch.
That was a short answer, succinct, but yes.
So I'm in my first job right now, and I'm a user experience designer, and I'm working in a place where it's like I'm very comfortable working with who I work with. It's equally female and male, but I find the issue is more about age. The fact that I'm so young, I'm probably the youngest person at my job. I get discriminated that way. I was wondering if you've ever had that experience and how you've overcome it.
Wow, I would say in user experience, I would think being young would be your benefit because for those of us who have a few wrinkles, there's a horrible discrimination sometimes in the other way direction. That's nuts because usually people straight out of college are the best social media. I'm surprised to hear that actually.
Yeah, I think that you should just say, well, I do know.
Yeah, yeah. You should say, yeah, I grew up with this and I know what I'm talking about. I would have the confidence to do that.
Yes.
Can I add on to her previous question where she said, do you get called bossy? I feel like women, if we're direct, we're often called bitch, whereas men, if they're direct, they're called leaders. So then how do you become a leader without being bitch?
I'm gonna say something about Sheryl Sandberg's book. I'm sorry, I'm not her PR agent. There is a fascinating study in her book where they take. It was actually a woman who started her own company, and they took all of the accomplishments she had done, and they called her. Her name was Heidi, and then they kind of listed these accomplishments and asked a group to kind of rate this person. Would you want to work for them? Are they a good leader? Blah, blah, blah. Then they took the exact same thing and put the name as Howard and asked a bunch of people the same thing. And what's fascinating about this is that the qualities that are admired in a leader in men work against you as a woman. And the thing that's interesting is this is all documented in studies and whatnot, and if you realize this, there are tips that she gives, and I can't do it as well as she would, about how you actually can couch how you say things, because for women are expected to be collaborative, and if you go in and say, I did this, people look down on you. If you go in and say, we did this, people feel good about that. So it's hard. I mean, and you know, not that Sheryl knows everything, but it was fascinating because she backs all of her things up with studies and lots of references in the back of the book. This isn't just her, you know, pulling it out of the thin air.
I think it's telling that we're asking the question because the point is women seem to care. So one of the toughest lessons I ever learned is when I became a creative director, there were people around me, it was within the same agency, women were pissed. Other women were pissed at me. You'd like to think it's not like that, but they were. And I wanted everybody to like me. That was the worst, that was the biggest problem I had, is I cared that people might think I'm a bitch, or that, why did she get that promotion? I cared deeply, and it tore me up for probably a year. And then I don't know if it was talking to somebody or just the realization, I was like, what is it that, why do I like creative directors? What is it about a creative director that I like? And I'm like, I just respect them. I don't agree with them all the time, but I just respect them because they handle every situation with honesty, fairness, I may not agree with them, I might not like it, but they deal with it with honesty and fairness. So from that day forward, I was just like, you know what, I'm just going to be the best creative director I can be. And they might not like that day, but I think eventually they'll like me because I've just dealt with it fairly. And I do think it's a trap that we care. I don't think men think about it. I don't think men are walking around going, will they think I'm a bastard? I don't think, I don't, you know? And so that's part of the way we're wired, you know?
I think a lot of women have an advantage as leaders because we tend to have an emotional intelligence about teams. We see the connections between people. We see the people that need to be lifted up, given space. You sound like a great leader because you took the time to have the conversation and then made the space for that person. And I think that's something that I've seen a lot of women leaders do. So I wouldn't worry. We can't worry about what people think about us. I think it's really focusing on doing great work. That's my biggest advice, I think, tonight. If there's two things, one is, know the times when you're saying no because you're scared of something versus just it's not the right thing. So be able to take those leaps and take those risks, but also just to focus on the work. Don't worry about if you're a man, if you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if you're, young or old. It's just if you're doing good work, that will speak for itself. And there's lots of ways to show your work. If you're not a big voice in the room, you can show work through sketching. You can put stuff on the wall. As a creative person, there's lots of ways to express your creativity. And I think that the work speaks for itself, and great leaders will recognize talent. You don't have to have a loud voice. You have to develop your own style and just do good work, and your path will open up.
It's there by the very dint of the fact that you're asking that question. You've been thinking about it. You have that ability. Stop and think. Literally, like if you read the book that Susan was talking about, or read my book, My First Time W, about how people started. It's as simple as that. You just have to take charge. I'll tell you a silly thing like the movie Star Trek. How the hell did Kirk start the thing? He just did it. He took charge, and he became the captain. All of us are ambitious. All of you have incredible talent, but you all are ambitious. The whole advertising community is one of great ambition. You're here and you want to be up here. And you've seen how people do this. You feel, you kind of intuited how people do it. But you've got it inside of you already. And there's no mentor. You have to be your own mentor. And you do it like that. Got it. If you don't have anybody else, you've got yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say you have to work a little harder to be a student of the business, but my biggest advice would be it's all made up. Yeah. Everybody wants somebody to tell them what the right answer is, and you're that person. And so, like on any given day, what do we agree with our creative directors 50% of the time? I mean, it's a subjective business, so it's what the right answer is what you say it is, and you just have to say it with conviction.
And
honestly.
Say it with respect, and remember that you would want to be treated well, and so you should treat people well. And just be mindful of ego and show a little bit of humility, be able to delegate, be, as Chloe was saying, be there to understand if people need your help, be a listener. There's so many stories I could tell of things people that haven't done any of those things, and you just see that it's so destructive and unhelpful, and people will leave. They won't want to work for you. They won't want to be there. But if if you can show, respect and humanity with still the focus of wanting to do fantastic work, but not forget that, you don't want to burn people out, you don't want to drive people away. Just be human and it'll work out.
Somebody asked a question before about, I think it was you here, about looking up to people and looking for answers. You would be surprised how many senior people look for those answers themselves. You would be shocked. I'm not after all of these years. But the creative person also, and not ego, but the creative people, everybody wants a pat on the back, no matter how senior they are. This is the work I did, or my agency did, my team did. It's nice to have that pat on the back. I was at a conference once, very, very senior person, gave a speech, and he came up to me, how'd I do? How'd I do? And it was like, the puppy, pet me, pet me, pet me. So you just have to remember that, yes, these people have answers. Nobody has all of the answers. You're going to be very, very senior one day. You're not going to have all of the answers, but as a teammate, together, hopefully you'll be able to get all of that. Anyway, next question. Yes?
Chloe, you just mentioned that it's important to have your own style and to be aware of it. But I was wondering that as a creative director, is it more important to have your own individual style or to be as versatile as you can be for every possible client?
Well, there's a difference between your style as the person and the work. I think at RGA for many years we've followed this T-shaped model in terms of craft, where you over thousands of hours build up a craft as an experienced designer, a visual designer, a copywriter, technologist, and then at the creative director level you gain literacy, you go broad. So you have your craft, your trunk, your roots, and then broaden as a creative director to be able to direct across disciplines. But now we're actually seeing more of these kind of square people that are good. They're kind of polymaths. They're good at social media and strategy and planning and maybe experience design. And for many projects and clients, they're great. So the jury's out. I'm still grappling with, I see beauty in both. But what I was talking about is really developing your style as a leader. Imagining that we're all in the room, have the seeds of being a leader. What would your leadership style be? That's something that's unique to everyone. And I've seen very quiet people develop such grace and poise that clients the room will just stop and listen to what they have to say, because they rarely talk, but when they talk, it's really intelligent. So I think what I mean about personal style is just that, what's your leadership style gonna be? But in terms of craft, I really do believe it's great to have a deep craft in at least one discipline. But if you have the talent to broaden and do a couple more things, more power to you. That's awesome. Yeah.
I'll just add one thing to that, because I think for young people, looking for their first job, sometimes they're afraid to ask in an interview, well, what kind of manager are you, right? And you should ask. It's a marriage, so to speak, right? A little bit. So I think when you kind of know what you need as a person, as a young person, I'm somebody who's a little bit more independent, or I'm somebody that needs a little bit of extra coaching or whatever. I think there's nothing wrong with acknowledging that about yourself and then asking a question in an interview. Many times I'll ask people, okay, what are you prepared to learn, and what are you prepared to unlearn if you want to work with me, right? Because there are always going to be opportunities for people. As I'm building a team, I'm looking at people like, okay, well, could this person be my clutch time thinker? Could this person be more of my broad thinker? Could this person be my sensitivity chip? Because this, so everyone plays a little bit of a role in some way. And as a manager, they don't get to see everybody else's work all the time, right? They think the baby that they birthed is the most beautiful thing ever, every time it's on my desk. So sometimes I have to go through the exercise of putting all the work up so you can see your baby is kind of ugly in comparison to everybody else's. And it's a little bit of a reality check, but it lets people know that, when I need you and I know what your skill set is, because I'm going to take the time, I wouldn't put you on my team if I didn't want your skill set, you're going to shine, because I'm going to expect you to come to the plate with it, So it's very important that I feel as a leader, some people are really good coaches. I've worked for some creative directors that were great coaches. They didn't necessarily win the awards themselves, but they definitely knew how to push you to get it. Or there were people who did know how to win the awards, but they only knew how to win it their way. So it was almost like, well, I'm going to let you write this script, but then I'm going to rewrite it. So it becomes a challenge to work, in that kind of environment. But I think that over the course of your career, you learn a lot when you work with different people and you really understand the different leadership styles that you're working under even. So when you go into a job, you kind of know, okay, what is going to feed me best and what's going to help me excel. One of the best situations, and I'm sorry to hog, but one of the best situations I was in at one time was I had a creative director who hated everyone. He was so mean. He yelled all the time, and this was totally when it was acceptable for your creative director to grab you by the shirt and like push you into the wall for not getting something done. No HR filter at all. And I saw him do this to several guys, and it was like always scary. I was always afraid to go and take anything to him. It was a beer account. It was always like, if it's not funny, get out of here, whatever. And I just could not understand, God, why is this guy so mean? He's just so mean all the time. It just so happened that I was working late one night. I happened to have my cubicle a couple doors down from where his office was, and I overheard his wife on the phone ripping him a new asshole. Okay? Literally, over milk, over when are you coming home, over the kid is crying, going bananas. And it like clicked. This guy has no power at home. He has no power at home. So that's why he's so mean to all of us. So when I kind of realized that, it kind of helped me right away see, if I give this guy just a little bit of power in the work that I'm doing, he will back off. And that's exactly what happened. As soon as I started giving him more credit, you know what? That thing you told me to do, it actually inspired me to do this. I ended up selling the stuff I wanted to sell versus what he wanted me to just do as a wrist. Because now I kind of understood where he was coming from. I understood my boss was a human being, okay? So to that end, I actually became somebody on his team that he could kind of go to when he had an idea, didn't really know what to do with it, but knew it would set me off on something. So it became a way for me to kind of be a player on his team and really see my value. So ultimately, it's a two-way street, I think, with leadership. You have the people that you're working for, but you also have to know that you're working for you too. And you have to understand what that's going to do in the long run.
Climbed a lot of ladders. Have you ever along the way felt like people tried to keep you down where you are to the point where, hey, you should be grateful for what you have, you already are this great creative or whatever, like that people would be offended or threatened by you wanting to be more ambitious or rising above? Because, you've kind of gone very high up, and did you hit a lot of resistance along the way, or did you get a lot of support of, this is the path you should take, or no, you should be happy where you are? And you're bothering, you're threatening me because you're having to step on a few people to get up there.
I haven't. I felt like I've mostly been propelled by the men around me, with one exception to that. We had a new CEO come in who had come from a very ugly situation where a woman ate his lunch. And so when he came to us, it was clear that he had animosity towards women. And there were a few senior women, and we all looked at each other and said, we're fucked. Like, we were doing so well, and now we're fucked. And I think, honestly, again, that whole, maybe we're more perceptive. It was sort of the understanding what's really going on behind there, and we found this, because we didn't know at first. We're like, why is he so, we're so nice. Why is he so, it's like, oh, okay, he thinks at any moment we're gonna become Cujo or something like that, And we just, I think what we did is we worked for a long time to show him we're in it for him, for the agency. Nobody's out for CEO. That's fine. That's not my area anyway. So it happens, but I think it probably depends greatly on the agency you're at. I can't speak to other people's experiences, but other than that blip, I feel like I've been pretty lucky.
Mary has indicated that was it for the evening. If you would like any of these women to autograph the books, I think Lucy, Mary has them over here. We'll be more than happy to do that for you. But thank you all for coming again.
because one thing that does help in this business is to have allies. And if you have allies and make friends, and that's what's really, really key. And speaking of mentorship, our next program in the Creative Movements Leadership Series is an evening of mentors where you can find a mentor and have mentors talk to you about mentoring, and that's on October 29th. All right? And my last pitch, I hope it's not too shrill, is for membership. Support the One Club, because we are a good organization. It may not give you the glamour. Did that win a pencil at the one show?
Sure it was, sure, yeah. Of course.
I'm sure it did.
Well, don't be so sure. There's a lot more canned lines given out than one show pencils.
Not back then.
But anyway, make it, this gentleman's laughing because he knows. I'm making a pitch for membership, support the One Club, and we will support you. It's as simple as that.
And expect an email from me. I'll be sending you all the info.
She got your info. So anyway, give a big hand to